I think probably, there's a lot I would talk about with this fund that I'm involved in called Pronomos Capital. My partner in it is Milton Friedman's grandson, the Nobel laureate economist, and it's backed by Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, a lot of really big names in tech. And we invest in these new startup cities around the world. And so there's a lot to talk about in terms of our learnings from different places that we've tried to invest in, like increasingly sovereign new cities. And then in particular, there's a new one that I'm working on in Africa that really addresses a lot of the banking, crypto, and fintech like regulatory issues. And I think there's the same opportunity in bio. I think there's the same opportunity in many areas where the governance around a very important commercial vertical is just like breaking down and not able to evolve quickly enough. And we need to basically change from like a legal, like suggestive and then evaluation model to like a tech model. So what I mean by that is like, let's say banking as a simple example. The way that it works today is like the governments will publish a bunch of like basically guidelines, things that you have to follow to like onboard a customer or do surveillance on their account. And then the banks are responsible to implement all that stuff, right? And then the government regulatory bodies come around every so often and they do evaluations of the banks and see if they're meeting up to standards or not. But it's really problematic because it's fuzzy, right? Like the rules are fuzzy, and so you get these situations like in like Coinbase right now, where Coinbase was allowed to IPO. The SEC and everybody hasn't really given them a hard time about anything yet, and then all of a sudden FTX blows up, and now they're coming around suing the shit out of them and making all these claims about what they haven't been doing. Banks forever have had a hard time with KYC, AML, and all the sort of bank regulatory stuff. I think that the government should be hosting APIs for this stuff. So it's like, instead of telling you how you need to do your risk screening to onboard a customer, I just host an API. And you give me the dossier of information about the customer. I tell you whether or not you can onboard them in my jurisdiction, right? Because like if I'm the government, this is my jurisdiction. And so I'm going to be able to come around and look at all your data anyways inside your bank. So why wouldn't I just make you send me the data, proactively and do the risk screening on my side? And the ultimate irony of all this is that whether it's the banking regulators or it's the pharma regulators or whatever, when they do these risk assessments and evaluate like the results of a clinical trial or like the results of a bank's anti-money laundering program or whatever, very ironically, they go and buy software from people like Palantir and stuff like this in order to do it. So it's like, at the end of the day, it's going to have to be software because software is going to be required to deal with the scale of the data in the modern world. It already is required. And so we might as well just make the policy software in the first place. And so that's the thing that I didn't want to get into a lot because it's very nuanced, but I basically think this idea of law as code and moving policy into software and treating government as like a tech platform is really important, and otherwise we just won't be able to like keep up with how industries are evolving.
Cool, great addition. So by now you've had enough time to think. So who has a great question? Who wants to go first? Here.
So from your knowledge, you said you've worked with AI for 20 years in machine learning and stuff like this. How you think is going to evolve from now, and how the things, I bet with what we have now with AI is just a small glimpse. Like I think it's a bigger picture coming up. And how we're gonna see a change suddenly, how it's gonna change our lives. I bet it will change more than it's now.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, was the first part of the question sort of like technically where I think it's going, like from a technical perspective, or how it's going to be?
Or how you view it, like
how
from your knowledge and what you experienced in those 20 years.
Yeah, so I think there like one extremely important point is that AI has always evolved in like a rush of hacks, and then a phase of like distillation and formalism. And right now we've been in the rush of hacks phase with these huge LLMs and giant neural nets that we don't really fully understand. And more recently, there's been a whole bunch of work trying to formalize this stuff. I expect to see in the next like 5 years or so, massive breakthroughs in like understanding what's happening with these things, formalizing them, and then being able to achieve the same results with way smaller models, much lower, parameter space than exists today in the big LLMs. And some of the people like OpenAI and so on have even come out and said this lately, that like the next steps are not, bigger and bigger models, but kind of new approaches. So I think we'll go through one of these phases now of like much more formal, more math-heavy kind of stuff, figuring out how to make all this, more densified and smaller. I think that will take the next like 5 years or so. Once that happens, then it'll be probably like another rush of like these crazy hacks and like coming up with just solutions to problems that we thought were outside bounds for like many years. So that's what we've seen now, where like, that's why everyone's mind is blown with the ChatGPT thing, because we didn't think that we would be able to feel AI interacting with us like that for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's there. And it's like, whoa, holy shit, this is crazy. And that's from this massive rush recently with the big neural nets and the whole approach that we're taking with these like really huge models. So I expect that the next wave of this kind of rapid hacking process that happens after we formalize stuff more, we'll just start to see like absurd shit, that will really surprise people. Like, again, with stuff like drug discovery or materials, like I was mentioning earlier, we'll just see like crazy breakthroughs that we didn't think were, like I wouldn't be surprised if we completely eradicate all cancer in the not too distant future. And people are not really probably prepared for that. He just mentioned like longevity. Like we might find that within the next 10, 20 years, we can make ourselves live way longer, maybe even indefinitely, maybe 200 years. Like, what does that do to the world when all of a sudden most people are going to live to be 200 years old? That would be crazy, right? So I wouldn't be surprised to see just like radical breakthroughs like that. Also in energy and like energy storage and battery tech, like if you saw a huge radical change in that, all of a sudden, there'll be breakthroughs. Quantum computing would be another one that AI could accelerate a lot, figuring out how to build quantum computers at larger scale. And then, of course, you're going to be building AI on quantum computers once we do that. So that becomes like this weird, like self-fulfilling loop where AI helps you build quantum computers faster, then you train AI on quantum computers, which gives you even crazier AI, and just like that could be a crazy feedback loop there. So I see that one happening. And then I think we'll probably see some massive breakthroughs in physics, which will be really important, because then we can start to become like seriously interplanetary. We can start to have like really serious changes in how we generate energy that get rid of a lot of these stupid arguments that we're having now. And just, we won't be thinking about stuff like, the Germans starting to mine coal again or whatever. Like none of this shit is going to matter, because we'll just be generating power, like at just ridiculous scale, like compared to what happens today. So my guess, that's why I wanted to highlight a couple of examples where AI ties with these other scientific fields, because I think that's what's going to really change everything, way more than we can comprehend. Is like the next wave is not this ChatGPT type stuff where we're interacting with a text system or we're generating images or whatever. The next phase is when AI is interacting with all these fundamental sciences, and we're just having like massive scientific breakthroughs. And so I think that kind of stuff, like we'll start to see a lot of it in the next 20 years. And it's going to be very surprising for people who aren't thinking this way. That's why I'm trying to highlight it. It's just like everyone is surprised with the Chat GPT stuff, but it'll be like way more so when all of a sudden somebody announces like, yep, we can make you live to 200 years. People are gonna be like, what the fuck, this can't be real. And then like 2 years later, it's real, everybody can use it. Like that kind of stuff's gonna be crazy, And so I think a lot of these very like discontinuous changes that are like radically fly in the face of everything we assume about life are just gonna like fuck with a lot of people's heads, I think it will really mess with people's heads. So I try to prepare people for this, like, hey, it's gonna start changing a lot faster. It's gonna get crazy.
What I like about your predictions, you say also, because you've been in the world of AI quite a bit, and you say, this ChatGPT is not a big surprise, right? Because you've been working on it for 7 years. So yeah, and so I would also encourage people to say, look a little bit deeper into any of these sciences and any of these fields. And you can see it happening already.
It's already happening.
A lot of talks, and it's just because all of us are unable to see all those signals.
You can't keep on top of all of it, right? Yeah. I know this stuff because of DCVC, especially. I've been in the AI field for like 20 years or so, like I was saying, but also I created one of the top funds in the world with my other partners for investing in this kind of stuff. So I've had the benefit of seeing synthetic biology and material science and energy stuff and so on, like for over a decade now, and watching it all evolve and seeing the themes and what succeeds and fails and so on. So, I think it's hard. It's just really hard to keep on top of it all because it's all changing so fast. So you're right. That's the challenge. Is like as a lay person who doesn't really focus on all this stuff for a living, there's just so much happening that you can't really understand all those things.
Yeah. So next to the anti-aging, another thing I missed in your presentation. Well, there's probably 1,000 things that are.
Yeah, it's a lot missing.
We can talk about, but is sort of the emotional state of human beings, because in the end, all of this is sort of happening around human beings.
Yes.
And it's my humble prediction that the human race will go extinct somewhere soon, out of happiness. Because we're always going to be so happy with our AI, we're going to be so happy with all the machinery around us that we don't really care about other human beings anymore. The birth rate will go down, etc. Elon Musk is also really afraid of that.
Oh yeah.
So what's your sort of vision or?
Yeah. So another crazy thing that this is a startup I actually want to do. So we are terrible at training ourselves, right? We're very good at training AI models now, but we're terrible at training human minds. And I think we need to look very seriously at this. Like the way we educate ourselves sucks. Our emotional state really sucks. We're all sitting here with all these inherited pathologies and biases from our families and stuff, right? Like half the families around the world are all broken up and have super traumatized kids and shit. And like, we're not doing a good job of dealing with this. And then meanwhile, we're going to be increasingly competing against AI models, and the AI models are trained in like the most optimal possible way, right? We get the best, most globally canonical data that we can, and we very carefully clean it up, and we're so attentive to how we train these models, which is why they're performing better and better. And if you compare it to how we teach humans, I would argue that we do a way better job with the AI than we do with ourselves, and that's probably not a good idea, right? If you want to see, like you're saying, the human race hang around, then we should probably start to look at a new way of training our own minds, also using AI, right? And so we should be basically we should have an open AI for like our brains, basically, to train ourselves. And you mentioned emotional state. The biggest thing that's like sort of the biggest hurdle for the human species is we have this super powerful new brain, and then we have the lizard brain. And like they don't work together so well, right? And the lizard brain is always hijacking us, and working on your mental health and coming into a good place with being able to regulate your emotions and all this kind of stuff is very difficult. And very few people even really go on that journey and really properly spend time to get good at it. So There's just a massive amount of pathological behaviors and self-sabotage and stuff that comes from a lack of emotional maturity and ongoing struggles with mental health issues, which again, you know, could be diagnosed and dealt with and so on way better than it is today. Like the mental health issue worldwide is just massive, and like the psychiatry and psychology fields are really in a shitty like state where we don't even diagnose stuff correctly, you know. So being able to diagnose stuff correctly, work with the pharmaceutical interventions, work with all the different behavioral interventions and trainings and like rewiring of the brain is huge, you know, and I don't see anything good in that space. You know, the only thing you see in that space are like these fucking meditation apps, right? It's like, go do a 10-minute meditation and here's like an Instagram affirmation of know your worth or manifest or whatever. And it's like, fuck, are you serious? Like that's supposed to fix somebody who has like serious mental health problems? It's not gonna do shit. You know, these could be small practices in a way bigger like bag of tricks, but I think we need to start attacking like how we train our minds and looking at how advanced it is that we're approaching the training of neural nets and being like, well, we have a meat neural net in our head, right? So why don't we try to train that thing better? That's probably a decent start if we don't want to be like taken over by the AI like overlords, right?
Yeah. So what's your take on Neuralink?
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. That's again something like I've followed that kind of stuff forever because I'm super into robotics. So quite a long time ago already, we had robotic arms under the control of chimpanzees with implanted chips, and they could, you know, they learned to like grab a banana with this robotic arm, like using only thought control, and so that's been around for quite a while. So it's a like well-established train of research. It's absolutely going to work. And we should be able to control like as much of the world as we can just directly with our minds, for sure.
All right.
Hi. So, at least from where I see, any currency, be that from the gold, dollars, virtual currencies, their only value is in our belief. How much we believe they are worth, right? Yeah. So how much we can actually buy, what can we get for them, right? And I think this is common with all the currencies, be that virtual currency, gold, from definition. So actually no currency has any value in case we don't believe that we can get something for it, right? And then I remember I'm also investing in virtual currencies, by the way, and before the Ukrainian war, there was a belief, it looks like it was not correct, that the Bitcoin and the virtual coins could be as stable as gold when it comes to some problems in the global economy. And it kind of turned out that this was not the case. As you probably know, since the Ukraine crisis, all the virtual coins had quite a bad path, and even now they kind of worth half compared to dollars. Yeah, we are still comparing to dollars or something, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you see why the coins dropped in their value so much since the Ukraine crisis?
Yeah, so I have actually a post about this, and if you search like Bradford Cross and I think like manias or financial manias or something, you'll be able to find it, where I share I think like my top 10 books about the history of like mania, panic, and crash and all that good stuff. Lots of really cool books out there about this stuff. And so, you know, historically, and I called this out very close to the top of the crypto market, by the way, and I didn't have any crypto at the time because of this. And, you know, so historically, whenever you have these manias early on in markets, there's always a crash of like 80 to 90%. And, you know, it's again one of these things that shocks people because they never expect that something will go down like that much, right? It seems like a huge amount. But that's exactly what happened, you know, and I set all my buying targets for ETH is the first thing I started buying last summer. And I set all my buying targets for like super low, like $800 or whatever. And everybody's like, no, there's no way in hell it's gonna get to 800. And yeah, it totally did. Like I accumulated a ton of it at like 900 or something. So to me, that was very expected, right? To have mania panic cycles, especially in new markets, is very expected. And if you study the history of currency, having a ton of volatility and discontinuity in the earlier life of currencies is very normal as well. And so everything that we're seeing in crypto, it's all completely normal, and frankly, it should be expected. It's just that most people know fuck all about financial history, about real financial history. So that's why I wrote that post, to encourage a lot of my friends in tech to go and really educate themselves about financial history, because these things always repeat themselves, like it's not really new. So that's why I was able to maneuver around and do so well with how I entered, into cryptocurrency. You mentioned another thing I want to address is you mentioned like intrinsic value. And I think one of the things that we can start to look at with digital currencies is like how do we create value as a side effect and then use that to modulate supply. So if you want to look into this, there's something called proof of useful work. There's a little bit of like cool work on it, but not as much as I'd like to see so far. I would love to see a currency that trains AI models as its side effect. There's tons of technical challenges about it that I don't really want to go into right now, but I think it's a bit of a pie in the sky idea, but ideally if you can create value when you're doing the computing, then you can self-regulate the supply. Like you can grow the supply because you're growing value each time. Whereas like I think the Bitcoin model, for example, is very naive, where you say we're just going to have a fixed supply. Well, I'm not sure that makes sense. It's not really well informed by economic history, and like we abandoned the gold standard for many reasons. It wasn't just about world governments wanting to manipulate money supply and stuff. That was definitely part of it. But there were many practical problems as well. Like you talk about high volatility and stuff like that. So seeing the high volatility, seeing the mania panic cycles, all that I would completely expect to see in a new asset class like crypto. And I think it will stabilize over time. Like volatility will go down over time. The inefficiency, the price inefficiency and like tradability of it will go down over time. Like the global currency market, the fiat market, it's the largest and most liquid market in the world, and it's the most efficient market in the world. It's closest to the efficient market hypothesis, or like Brownian motion. It's closest to random walk of any market in the world. And so as crypto becomes bigger and more liquid, I expect to see volatility go down, panics will go down, also these huge bull runs, they'll go down, and volatility will go down, and then it becomes more and more suitable to use it as currency. Yeah. So that's how I think crypto will evolve. It just looks like all the other currencies throughout history. Like nothing started like it is now, Like the dollar, which is like the sort of reserve of the world, went through tons of volatility over the years, So you got to go look back and look at the beginnings of these currencies. Yeah.
A question from your main presentation on Africa, right? So I get a point on growing population and the fact that they are implementing the latest technologies and all, but do you see their governments really open to what you were mentioning about government as a tech?
You're saying in Africa?
Yes.
In Africa. Yeah, absolutely. In Africa is where you see the largest number of these new private cities being built. There's a company called Rendeavor that I would encourage everyone to check out. It's the largest builder of private cities in Africa. And I think that you'll see increasing amounts of concessions and like autonomy in these free zones that these cities are operating within. And it's going to be just like kind of rapid privatization of government. And so, yeah, I think they're more open to it than anywhere else. Whereas, like, you know, doing that in the U.S. or Europe, you'll never be able to do that, right? No way. But in Africa, I think, you know, again, if the governments are, you know, like performing poorly effectively, like if they're struggling to keep up with the population growth and urbanization and they're not able to get infrastructure in place, then they're going to turn to these kinds of solutions. And, you know, that's why I use the Lagos example. There's something called the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Lagos, which people should check out. It's one of the coolest projects in the entire world that I've seen. And it's just like, it's super kick-ass. It's like shocking, all the stuff that's happening in there. And it's all this big, like, basically private city, you know. It has the first massive oil refinery in Africa. It's gonna be the largest, like, single-track oil refinery in the entire world. It just got commissioned, like, last month. It's gonna have, like, the best big deep water port in Africa. And it's going to have a huge, like, tech city. That's the reason I was there, because we invested in the tech city. It's called Itana, if you want to check that out. So yeah, I mean, it's awesome what's happening in Africa when you actually go there. And frankly, I think the world is just racist, and so people don't go to Africa and they don't understand what's happening in Africa, and they have this mental view of what it is that's just wicked outdated by decades, you know? And so when you actually go there and hang out and go around and you see what's happening, it's like, whoa, this is amazing, you know? Like, that's the place to be. I've never felt so excited since I went to, like, Silicon Valley in, like, the mid-2000s. You know, when I went out there in the mid-2000s, I had this intense feeling like, I need to be here. This is the future. We're inventing the future here. I had the exact same feeling in Africa when I went there last month, where just like, wow, this is it, you know? I started moving jobs immediately, like opening new roles in Lagos. I moved my foundation. I have a foundation to invest in young black entrepreneurs coming out of high school. And I was doing that in the Bay Area. I immediately shifted it to Lagos. It's just like, it was just so obvious. It's like, holy shit, this is the future. So yeah, I would pay very close attention to Africa, because that's really where a lot of the most cool, disruptive stuff is gonna happen. Because once, you know, remember, the government, this future is not about the government getting their shit together. The future is about the government realizing that they can't, and getting the fuck out of the way. That's what it's about, in my opinion. And so as long as you have countries in Africa where they're like, okay, we're not able to deal with this, here, you deal with it, and then you form a corporation, that's beautiful. The way these Rendeavor guys do it, which I love, is they have the government, they make a contribution of the land into a joint venture, and then they own equity in the venture, and then they're on the board of the venture. And so now the government has long-term incentive to see that private venture succeed. And unlike a lot of special economic zones around the world where they have like a 30-year or 100-year land lease, and then the same for their policy concessions, then it reverts all back to the government. Unlike that, the Rendeavor guys have this stuff in perpetuity. So it's like a permanent, like, private vehicle. And I like that model a lot more, because I think, again, like, just the corporation model and its governance and its capability to execute is probably better suited to solving a lot of problems that we have in government. So I think Africa is the place to be able to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A question about AI. Do you think it will ever replace programmers, software programmers?
I think it already is. Yeah. And, you know, it's like very meta, right? Where it's also gonna replace AI researchers, right? Like, it's just gonna replace everything. But the thing you have to remember is that it always, like, will move humans up the stack, you know? There's a theoretical future point where stuff starts to happen completely autonomously, and then it's like a concern for the human species and stuff. But before we worry about that, it's like just gonna keep moving us up the stack. And so, you know, what you'll have is like 80% of the workforce for a ton of jobs is just going to get chopped off because they were mediocre to begin with. And then the 20% that are actually really great, I'm kind of an elitist, right? Some people would say I'm a dick, but like I just think this is the reality of the world. Like 20% of the people do 80, all the impact. The rest of them are just kind of hanging on for dear life. And that's why we always talk about the 10x engineer and all this stuff, right? It's like in the future, it's only 10x engineers. There isn't a job for anyone else because you have the best people and they're using like way more powerful tools. And so having those people tech lead or manage a whole bunch of mediocre engineers, that world is going to go away. So you have this model of outsourcing a bunch of engineering jobs to developing economies and having these huge engineering teams. I've always hated that model. I think it's always performed inferior to having a smaller, more elite team that you just pay more. But a lot of management and leadership has struggled with that philosophically. It's like this idea, hey, like if you think a 10x or 20x engineer exists, right? Let's just assume they exist. And I have to pay them less than 10x or 20x, then that's the bet I should be making all fucking day. Instead of paying a 1x or 0.5x engineer, like whatever the market rate is, if I can have somebody that's 20 times that productive, but I only pay him 2 or 3 times more, that's fucking great. I'll do that all day, right? I'll just keep rolling the dice on that as long as I can. And so that's always been my approach to building teams. I'm an elitist when it comes to building teams. I want smaller teams of better people. I'll be competitive on compensation and stuff versus trying to have this big head count of people that I'm paying less. And I think the more powerful the tools are, and AI is just one of these tools, the more this will become like the model. So I think the world will go towards this model that I've kind of always been a believer in, where it's like smaller, more elite teams with way more powerful tools. And it's in the part of the world that's going to be most disrupted by this are folks that have these just like massive teams, right? Like there's so many projects around the world that have thousands of engineers. And you look at it and you're like, what the fuck are you doing with 5,000 engineers? What are they all doing? Like, how is this even possible? And the answer is they're not doing much, and like I just think that can't be sustained for very much longer. So.
We saw an example of that on Twitter. Somebody stepped in.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And he nuked like 90% of the team, and it's like they're shipping shit even faster, right? And everybody who's on the political left hated that. They hated that. But he was just like, I own the whole fucking thing now, so too bad, But yeah, like you're right, and I think we'll continue seeing more and more of that. All the big tech companies have done a ton of layoffs lately, like thousands and thousands of people, and it's not really affecting anything. So yeah, and frankly, I think it's better for people. I'm an elitist when it comes to performance, but I'm a humanist, and I have a lot of empathy, and I really think that people who are not performing in their jobs, and they're not like super into it and geeky about it and always learning and they're pumped to go to work, those people are kind of miserable. Like let's help them find something else, right? Like humans are very gifted, but we need to have that spark, that passion, that drive. We need to feel good about what we're doing, like we're really discharging our abilities into the world. That's, I think, what the definition of self-actualization is basically we all have this innate desire to take all these God-given abilities and discharge them into the world before we die. We want to have that impact, be like, I left it all on the field, right? And if you're miserable in your job and you know you're mediocre and you don't really give a fuck and you start developing a cynical attitude and everything, those people are miserable anyways. So it's not like you're getting rid of them and they have nothing else to do. Then it's good for them. They have to go do a self-discovery process. It's like getting out of a really bad relationship where you're like, why did I put up with that shit for so long? Like, blah, 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 and let me go work on my psychology and get into whatever childhood issues or whatever led me to that. So I think it's good. It's good for people to go through a self-discovery process after these mass layoffs. Yeah.
Hey, great talk. Going back to the topic of getting government to get out of the way and getting to city-states and such, how exactly are we going to do that? Since I see two problems. One is countries which have governments which are a bit like dictatorships.
Yep.
I'm guessing there's a lot of those in Africa. Countries that have like a coup every 5-6 years, where just somebody who was at the top of the army comes and takes over. Those countries probably don't really want city-states to come up because that's a competition to their not so good government.
Yeah.
And then countries like in the European Union and the States, which have a very well-formed political system with people in it for generations who really don't want to lose the power. And exactly as you said, they're banning crypto. They're basically trying to do anything that to kill anything that would take away from their power.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? Is it bloody revolt or?
I think it's a long, slow death, you know? Like go and study the history of the Roman Empire, you know, and just look at the long, slow death of it, you know? It doesn't just fall apart right away. It's a painful, long, and drawn-out process. And so that's what I see for the US and Europe, you know? It's not like we wake up one day and the EU breaks apart, or we wake up one day and the US breaks apart. It's a long, slow, painful thing. I mean, with the EU, we've already seen the UK situation, right? I think I would argue that's step one. And you'll see more and more of that over the years. But yeah, it's like you're going to have some countries where it isn't like a toxic dictatorship, and they don't really have a lot of the political machinery and infrastructure in place. And those are going to be the places that will embrace these kinds of new ideas and create more effective regimes for certain commercial activity to happen there. And they'll be able to build these like Singapores and Dubais and stuff. And then as that starts to happen, and more people move there, and it starts to really like explode, gradually the developed world is going to have to look at it and adjust and react. So that's what I'm talking about with how tech disrupts any industry. So some states will go so slow, they just won't make it. They'll eventually just like fall apart and like something like a new government will form. Some will look and see what's happening and be like, oh, fuck, like we can't just ban AI, we can't just ban crypto, like we have to do, look, everybody's going to this new place that this guy created in Africa and like setting up all their crypto companies there, and they're making a fortune, and people are using crypto in our country anyways, like it's illegally, and like we can't really prosecute all of them, like we need to be practical and change our approach. And a bunch of countries will do that. But they need to experience the pressure from the new world order getting built from some of these places that are open to it. And equally, you know, in the developing world where you do have those nasty dictatorships and shit, like, yeah, you're right, they're going to fight this stuff too. They're not going to be like having this enlightened view about these new, you know, private cities. They're going to be nasty, you know, they're going to be really nasty. A lot of the old colonial world in Africa is like that. You have the resource extraction that's occurring where the old colonial powers or the Chinese are basically pilfering out all the resources and taking it away, and then you have like government control of those resources, and some politicians who are corrupt, their pockets are getting lined to basically perpetuate this colonial model instead of allowing like African entrepreneurs to take over all these resources and keep the stuff there and start doing things like that oil refinery that I mentioned in Nigeria, right? That's the first big scale of this idea of keeping the African resources in Africa and making the value-added products in Africa, and that will create massive equity value in Africa. And that's what kind of needs to happen. But a lot of these corrupt dictatorships, they'll fight that like hell, because that's how they make, you know, all their money, is running a corrupt empire where they line their pockets from the resource extraction. So, but again, it doesn't matter because we don't need everybody to come over to this new model. We just need some countries that do it, and then we can prove success and just keep iterating we can't do it all at once anyways. You can't boil all the ocean anyways, right? We need to have more Singapore and Dubai type examples that we can point to and say, look, this shit works, you know? And then people will start to come around to it. Yeah.
Thanks. So we're massively over time anyway.
Okay.
But I for one am enjoying it. I see everybody's still engaged, so I'm going to allow one more question.
Do it.
And then maybe the rest sort of happens in the corridors.
Okay.
Are you around?
Yeah, I'm around. I have to check. I'm supposed to do some other stuff this afternoon, but I just have to go check my phone, which I haven't looked at since like an hour ago.
One more
or something,
question.
So.
Yes, thank you. So, given your extensive experience in AI research and your obvious interest in providing alternatives to the financial system and to the governance system, I was just wondering, can you make the opposite argument that governments would get bigger because of the technology they have now? For instance, you would be able to have increased transparency. So when you're able to do a medical diagnostic to a patient, does he have cancer or something, just using AI tools, you can also make diagnostics over the governments, in the sense that you would be able to detect easier suspicion of corruption of officials. So all these technologies, can you make the argument that it would lead to the opposite, what you seem to believe right now?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest example of that would be China, right? That do a very good job of operating like a centrally controlled nation state, and they've really embraced AI, and they've really embraced, surveillance of the citizenry and like building of various types of scores and stuff that they use. And it's an increasingly powerful nation, but I would argue that China is kind of at the apex of its power and like world influence right now, actually. Its population is in decline. The later generations are pretty lazy, to be honest, because they're inheriting a ton from like their parents, especially because of the small family size issue. Frankly, I've been stunned to see the same in Central and Eastern Europe, where it wasn't that long ago that this stuff was all under the Soviet sphere of influence. And when I started, my ex-wife's from Slovakia, so I've been coming back here for a long time, since about 2007. And I saw this hunger in the people that I'm starting to not see as much anymore. Like with the engineers, for example, like there's more laziness, and I'm surprised to see how the culture has changed so fast. So I think, in these big countries like the US, China, and a lot of the European countries, there's this kind of like laziness that comes from the wealth. And that kind of is like an issue in the history of empire, where like once these empires get rich, people start getting kind of lazy, right? At least back in the day with the Greeks and the Romans and stuff, they at least had orgies and feasts and stuff. Like, we didn't even have that anymore. We just like sit there looking at our phones and shit. So I think it's way less cool. Like in terms of like the Armageddon for our civilization, I think the Romans and Greeks kind of did it a lot better than we are, to be honest. But I see the same phenomena where it's just like everything is kind of slowly going down and people are getting lazy, and I think it's hard for the states to maintain their power and keep growing their power when it's like that, because ultimately it's all about the people and how empowered are they and how hard are they working. And if you build a state with very empowered people that are very motivated and they're working hard, then humans are amazing. They're just going to create amazing stuff every single time, 10 times out of 10, no exceptions. And so it's just a question of like, where is that going to happen in the world? And I don't see it really in the developed world anywhere. You'll see tiny pockets, but not like at large, like the whole of the United States or the whole of Europe or the whole of China. Like the younger generation is kind of behaving pretty similarly on a global basis. They all have a sense of entitlement. They're inheriting a ton of wealth from the previous generations. And as I said, even in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, you see it emerging in the youth, even though it wasn't that long ago that they were under communism. And you know, the folks who are in their 30s and their 40s, like those are the first generation to really break out of it. And they had so much hunger when they were in their 20s to like go and participate in the modern world economy. And then the generation below them, like I just don't see the same. So it's crazy to see that changes so fast, you know, and how quickly everybody is converging on this kind of malaise, I would call it. And so long as that's the case, I don't think that we'll see these big governments keep getting bigger, because they would like that. They would like to keep accumulating more and more power and stuff, but the people don't seem to want to work towards that goal, you know? It seems like a lot of people are like, the gas is low in the tank for continuing on that march. So yeah, even in places like China and Central and Eastern Europe, where you would expect the youth to keep going with it, it doesn't seem to be occurring that way. So yeah, no, I don't think it's very likely at all.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I would say this is a clear wake-up call, right? You've seen the future now. It's a wake-up call. You've seen the other areas in the world that are actually working harder than you and me. And you know, it's like all of us are comfortable. And so let's get out there. Let's get eager. Let's get curious. Let's get informed. And let's prepare for the future.
Yeah, I think one of my old mentors said this thing to me once, that I should become comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's really true. That's a super valuable way of thinking about everything. And I should also add, you know, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I could be totally fucking wrong about everything. So who knows? It's just predictions. Yeah. But like I said, I was right 20 years ago. So I might be right about the next 20 years. So you might want to listen.
And it's actually quite easy to do your own research. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, thanks very much. So. Okay.